voices. There's no excuse. You've been loosed.
This is From Destruction to Dignity with Janice Pons. Each week, Janice shares her wisdom to enlighten, educate, and advance the culture in America today. Janice Pons is a mother, author, and free thinker, and your host for our podcast this evening. Now let's join your host, Janice Pons.
Greetings, greetings, greetings. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Come on in. My name is Janice Pons. I am the host on this podcast, From Destruction to Dignity, Clinical Perspectives, Spiritual Truths. Listen, we're on a journey together that has been absolutely amazing. Us flowing together as one, forming a more perfect union in our great nation as represented by our beautiful flag and our presidential seal. We've got an election this year is very critical, very important. So before we dive into this continued journey where we're provoking thought, bringing awareness and supporting each other as we point towards intervention as it may be needed, we are going to remind you about, we've got the call to the Capitals coming up on April the 13th. Want to invite you to go to hashtag Don't Mess With Our Kids. That's where you can register so we can have an idea about how many people are coming. We're praying for many things in our nation. We're focusing on our children, the target that's been put on their backs, the indoctrination process that's going on with our children. We're concerned and we want solutions. So we're praying for our children. We're having prayer, praise, communion, unity, and peace as we stand in the gap for our children on April the 13th at all the state capitals. Go to that hashtag, Don't Mess With Our Kids, and register. And all of this is going to culminate on the Washington Federal Mall on October 12th, 2024, where the focus is to have 1 million voices arising, singing praises unto our God, prayer, intercession, standing in the gap. We know that God is not done with America. You know why? We the people are still here. So remember, I want you to share this with people. I got about 1,000 more people now, but about 1,000 people on JanicePons.com. If you share it with 10 people, we'll have 10,000 people. If those 10,000 share it with 10 people, we will have 100,000 people. If those 100,000 people share it with 10 people, we will have 1 million people. And already people are already earmarking those days for October the 12th. First, we got the state capitals, April 13th, and then we have October the 12th at the Washington Federal Mall. And so I'm really going to be pushing that on the podcast. So, and I want to say this, if you want to have our podcast, From Destruction to Dignity, Clinical Perspectives, Spiritual Truths. If you want to have our podcast live on your Facebook group, drop me a line at info@janicepons.com so we can regularly schedule a live telecast to your group. Also on info@janicepons.com, I can help get you connected with how to get connected with starting a prayer hub. Prayer hubs are forming all over the nation. I have my own. They're all over the nation. It is an integral part of what we're doing about our call to the capitals and about our 1 million voices are arising. We're praying right now. We're just in full force right now. So we invite you to be a part of that. So, you know, I am so excited about where we're going. Remember, we are going somewhere, and it's expecting us when we get there. Now, speaking of which, we've been on an amazing journey together in our nation, learning intricate things I didn't know, and I'm sharing them with you. This is a critical year in our nation. And tonight we're going to talk about America at the crossroads this election year. And for our clinical perspectives, we are going to touch on emotional maturity because I'm telling you, the bottom line, it's going to take some emotionally mature Americans flowing together as one to help to get us where we need to be because we are truly on a journey. And listen, I'm committed to us making progress. Yes, I am. So listen. In the last 8 years, from 2016 to 2023, America collected $30.2 trillion in tax revenue. We're laying out some facts here. The road we're traveling this election year in 2024 has our national debt at $34.1 trillion. We the people, the 240 million Americans, and let me tell you this, listen, this is very significant. In the last 6 months, I've been saying 240 million Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Guess what? It has increased 25,900,000 in 6 months. I know I've been on track. Yeah. So we the people, the 265 million Americans, 265,900,000 Americans who are subjected to systemic payroll tax deductions and can barely make ends meet demand that our Congress, which is the Senate and the House of Representatives, the ones that we are paying all these perks to and the $174,000 a year for their salaries, we demand that they create a uniform tax code where all Americans pay the same reduced income tax rate of 8.55%. Yes, that's it. When all Americans pay the reduced income tax rate of that amount, 8.55%, this will produce a watershed of $69.1 trillion in federal income tax, where we can wipe out the tax burden that we would have been kicking down the road to our children and grandchildren. Let me tell you how we got here. This all started in 1773, my fellow Americans. The Boston Tea Party was a political protest that occurred when they went down to Griffin's Wharf in Boston, Massachusetts, and they said, we are tired of this taxation without representation. They were the conservative colonial merchants who joined radical Samuel Adams and the Sons of Liberty to form an alliance to say, on December 16th, 1773, it was a group of about 60 to 130 men, and they were encouraged by a large crowd of Bostonians donned in blankets and Indian headdress. They marched right down to Griffin's Wharf, and they boarded those ships, and they dumped tea chests valued at 18,000 pounds into the water. They dumped a total of 342 chests of tea imported by the British East India Company into the harbor. Why? Protesting taxation without representation. Is that going on today? Stick with me. We're going somewhere. Listen where we're going. The Boston Tea Party gave the colonists the motivation to stand up for their rights and to ultimately risk their lives by going to war for their independence. The Boston Tea Party is also important for its inspiration to rebels all around the world, people that are standing up for what they believe in. What events happened as a result of the American Revolution? We got the Articles of Confederation. And what did they do? What are the Articles of Confederation? They served as the written document that established the functions of the national government of the United States after it declared independence from Great Britain. The Articles of Confederation featured a preamble and 13 articles that granted the bulk of the power of the states. To some degree, it was a treaty of alliance between 13 sovereign republics rather than the foundation for a national government. It wasn't perfect, so it was developing as they went. The Constitutional Convention of 1787 was called to revise the ailing Articles of Confederation. It wasn't perfect. They were working on it, developing it, structuring it. However, the convention soon abandoned those articles, drafting a new constitution with a much stronger national government. In 1787, a group of delegates from the states wrote a new constitution, the law of our land, to replace the Articles of Confederation. The Constitution united the states as a single nation, strengthening the federal government and giving it the right to raise revenue. You got to run it. You got to do it with money, to coin money, and to maintain the military that it fought in the American Revolution. We emerge with 3 branches of government: judicial, legislative, and executive. Written in 1787, ratified in 1788 and in operation since 1789, the United States Constitution is the world's longest surviving written chart of government. Its first three words, we the people, affirm that the government of the United States exists to serve its citizens. After ratification, meaning it was in law, it was in place. This is what we do. Congress set dates for the first federal election and the official implementation of the Constitution. Elections. Yeah, this is an election year. Guess what? Elections was set to take place on Monday, December 15th, 1788 to Saturday, January 10th, 1789. And the new government was set to begin on March 4th, 1789. We're laying down some historical facts. This has gotten us up to where we're at now. Stick with me. By issuing the Declaration of Independence, adopted by the Continental Congress on July 4th, 1776, the 13 American colonies severed their political connections to Great Britain. They said, it's over. You don't rule us anymore. Your taxation without representation, we don't submit to it. We're independent. We're free. The Declaration surmised the colonists' motivations for seeking that independence. What were the three main issues facing our nation after the American Revolution? Because you know some emerged. We still got a lot going on today. But what were the three main ones back then? Well, like other nations born in anti-colonial revolutions, the United States faced the challenge of building a sound economy, preserving national independence, and thirdly, creating a stable political system which provided a legitimate place for opposition. Now, how does this all connect with anything that's going on today? What are you talking about, Janice? I'm laying a foundation. I'm framing some things. How did we get to where we are now? Listen to me. My fellow Americans and my brothers and sisters, it's time to have a specific conversation in our nation. We're going to bring all of this together. We can no longer remain silent as a lot is at stake. Were those conservative colonial merchants silent in 1773? They were being used and abused, and they said enough is enough. No kicking the can down the road for our posterity to deal with the irresponsible, un-American trajectory that's going on. Listen, in the 1980s, coming on up to the present time, there was something called trickle-down economics. It became the economic theme of America. It is a theory that tax breaks and other beneficial policies for companies and the higher earners in society will put more money into the economy, which will eventually benefit everyone. So the question is, has trickle-down economics worked? Has it? Let's look at that. Why do we need to even consider a change 44 years later, going from 1980 up to 2024? How did we get to the point, my fellow Americans, that we now have a $34 trillion deficit in America if trickle-down economics is so great? When we add on the 5.5% interest rate to that $34 trillion deficit that we have right now, it equates to $1.87 trillion in interest on our national debt. Now, here's the question. Who's paying that interest? I am. 265,900,000 Americans. Remember, in 6 months, it's gone from 240 million up to 265,900,000 Americans. We're the ones paying that interest. Yes, it's being held by us. That number of working Americans who are living paycheck to paycheck, who can barely make ends meet, can barely keep food on their tables, on our tables, barely keep gas in our cars, let alone having extra money for extracurricular activities for children. Listen, there's a lot of struggling and suffering going on. Some have simply given up. We've talked about that from a clinical perspective. Does it have to remain this way in America? Are there any changes that can be made to rectify our challenges? Let's look at some facts. As it relates to tax revenue collected from working Americans, this is what has occurred over the last 8 years. Stick with me. This is facts. I've looked at all the data. In 2016, our tax revenues, what we paid into the system, what was automatically taken out of our checks, 2016, $3.3 trillion. 2017, $3.3 trillion. 2018, $3.3 trillion. 2019, $3.6 trillion. 2020, $3.4 trillion. 2021, $4 trillion. 2022, $4.9 trillion. 2023, last year, our tax revenues totaled $4.4 trillion. This totals, do the math, get your pens out, get your pad out, add it up. This totals $30.2 trillion of tax revenue being collected over the past 8 years from 2016 to 2023. There are now 265,900,000 Americans subjected to payroll taxes. America collected $30.2 trillion in tax revenues over the last 8 years, 2016 to 2023. Now, here is the intervention to save America fiscally. A moratorium for 8 years can turn this country around fiscally. Right now, what is going on is a national security threat. I can't say it loud enough. I can't say it enough. It's a national security threat. Do you know why? We are spending more money towards the interest on our national debt than we spent on our military. In 2023, we spent $816 billion on our military, who should be set up to protect us from all enemies, both foreign and domestic. We don't even have hypersonic missiles. I'm going to keep saying it. Russia has them. China has them. Iran has them. Process that for a moment. We don't have them. We're working on it. They have them. We don't. Let that soak in. Right now, listen, if we don't do something about that, we are already on a slippery slope sliding. How did we ever get to the place where the priority is not on making sure that we're fully equipped to be protected from all enemies, both foreign and domestic, my fellow Americans? Here we go. Here's the answer. There are solutions. Let's get solution focused. We propose that all Americans pay 8.55% on personal federal income taxes, 8.55% be paid on corporate business taxes, and 8.55% be paid on excise taxes. All Americans pay the same rate for 8 years. That's it. That's not hard. It's a decision. It's an 8-year moratorium to turn our great nation around, my fellow Americans and my brothers and sisters. 8 for 8 to make America great. Yeah. Want to make America great? 8 for 8 to make America great. This is what would happen. We looked at all the figures regarding the tax revenues that will come in. If we do this, what's going to happen? 2025, we will collect $7.5 trillion. 2026, $7.8 trillion. 2027, $8.1 trillion. 2028, $8.4 trillion. 2029, $8.8 trillion. Yes. You see what's going on? You see how it's growing? 2030, $9.1 trillion. 2031, $9.5 trillion. 2032, $9.9 trillion. Guess what we would have done collectively? This totals $69.1 trillion of tax revenue being collected over 8 years from 2023 to 2032. Actually, 2025. This was started in 2025. We're in 2023, it was last year. I'm setting the stage, guys. 2024, this is a critical year. So we're talking about starting this in 2025. And for 8 years, to take us up 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. We would have collected $69.1 trillion in tax revenue. Taxing productivity and consumption over the next 8 years from 2025 to 2032 at 8.55% is going to generate $69.1 trillion, which eliminates our total national debt, guys, of $34.1 trillion, and will even cover our $4.9 trillion tax collections for this year in 2024. Don't tell me we can't do it. It's just us getting on the same page. It's the legislators getting serious and stop kicking the can down the road and talking about raise the debt ceiling. Let's kick it down the road for the children and the grandchildren. Totally un-American. Listen, if we're talking about taxing productivity and consumption, let's look at that. Let's get an understanding together. Productivity is a measure of economic performance that compares the amount of goods and services produced, output, with the amount of inputs used to produce those goods and services. What's another word for consumption when we're talking about economics? Economic consumption is the utilization of economic goods to satisfy needs, or in manufacturing, some synonyms would be consumption, use, or use of goods and services. From a fiscal perspective, all depositors, listen, we're talking about money. There's a lot of money being slung around in this country, and so much is being irresponsibly not managed appropriately. From a fiscal perspective, we're talking about money. Let me ask you this, and let me present this to you. All depositors are paid the same interest rate on bank accounts. So, would it stand to reason that from a fiscal perspective that we all pay the same rate regarding our taxes? When we go to the bank, we get the same interest rate. What about us all paying the same tax rate? A fixed tax rate, a set tax rate. Everyone pays 8.55% across the board. Everyone. We would all keep our deductions related to charitable contributions, and we'd all get that same tax breaks. And we would all get the tax break on our pension and on our flexible spending account related to our health care. That's it. My fellow Americans, together we can save our great nation. One thing for sure is that change will be observable and measurable. Listen, guys, as we go forward, we're going to be dissecting this thing. Yes, we are. We are going to be dissecting it because let me tell you what, there are answers for our country. So, listen, it's going to take some mature people. This squabbling, listen, I'm done with political parties. I'm talking about America. America. It's going to take some emotionally mature Americans to step up. So from our clinical perspective tonight, we're going to look at emotional maturity. We're talking about some mature people on Capitol Hill stepping up and going, you know what? This silly squabbling has to stop. This silly squabbling between political parties is getting us nowhere. So what we're talking about is being mature people. Emotional maturity is hard. Yeah. And it takes a lot of work. It includes having a strong sense of self and being able to actively listen to others. Yeah, that's what it's going to take for us to have civil conversations and to problem solve what's going on in our nation and in our homes and in our schools. Emotional maturity isn't always easy, especially if you've had immature behaviors modeled to you as a child. In an argument with a friend or a romantic partner, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, it can be easy to revert to immature behavior like name calling, yelling, being defensive. But maybe if you put in the work, such as, y'all know I'm an advocate of the therapeutic process. That's work. Oh, yeah. If you put in that kind of work, you've learned how to get yourself grounded, how to ground yourself emotionally, doing the therapy, having the strategy, skills, and tools. Yeah. You'll feel like you finally develop better behavior. Yeah. So when that happens, are you an emotionally mature person now? Well, you know what? There's no such thing as a perfect emotionally mature person who's reached the apex of emotional maturity and stays there. It's like, I'm there. No one totally gets there. At the same time, there are a few things that we might consider for being emotionally mature. Here are some. Now, actively listening to different viewpoints. One of the ways to know that you become more emotionally mature as a person is you genuinely have an interest to listen to other people, simply giving others room and time to express their thoughts and listen. Emotionally immature people can make others feel like they have to race to get a word in or tiptoe around them on certain topics. But if you're emotionally mature, there's a sense that you can be you, they can be them, and you can have a conversation where both people can participate and both people listen to the other person. My motto on social media is what will happen if we talk to and with each other versus at each other. That's how I flow. You balance self-care. What would happen in America if we balance self-care with caring for others? I love my fellow Americans. I'm done with they Democrat, they Republican. They are American. Yes, they are my brothers and sisters. Yes, that blesses me. While it can be seen like being selfless and having endless empathy are signs of emotional maturity, healthy boundaries are also needed as well. They're important. You can be self-preserving and you can also be interested in other people, having empathy for them. People tell me that on my social media platform. I don't do no cussing and throwing people under the bus. I don't do it. They're my fellow Americans. This is about America and our posterity. For example, you know that you can't adequately show up for people if you're not taking care of yourself. So yes, there is self-care, but there's balance. If you think of how your words affect people, even when you're upset, emotionally mature people, they're always aware of how their words are going to land with the other person. Even if you're angry or upset, you might think twice before sending a long accusatory text. It's like, take that out. Don't send that, Janice. That's right. I have X'd them, some of them out. Saying the first thing that comes to mind when you're heated, I got delivered from that. That's right. That's right. You know how to regulate your emotions. I've changed on social media how I interact. Some people, if you look back at what I used to say years ago, I've changed. Oh, yeah. I've matured. Yeah. Emotional maturity. It's an ongoing process. You view arguments as collaborations, not fights, because emotionally mature people think before they speak. Arguments tend to go over smoothly. You're not looking for ways to attack, but looking to have a discussion and share information. Sometimes it can get a little touchy, but you share it respectfully. A good rule of thumb is to assess your emotional maturity is noticing how you feel when you disagree, and you might even be in a fight. Yeah. You might be in a disagreement. I mean, a verbal disagreement, not hitting each other. We don't do that. Emotionally mature people don't do that. But emotionally immature people, they tend to feel rigid and locked in, getting more defensive and charged as people disagree. But if you're actively trying to lower the temperature and have a productive discussion, that's a sign of emotional maturity, my fellow Americans and my brothers and sisters. We're talking about growing up. We're talking about making America great. We're talking about making America better. We're talking about pouring into our children the right thing. You notice when you're being emotionally immature, if you grew up with an emotionally immature parent, or an enmeshed family, you might unconsciously repeat some of those unhealthy behaviors. Yes, you do. Or struggle with emotional dysregulation. You can't get yourself regulated. You fly off the handle. A lot of times it's connected with emotional immaturity. You haven't been taught properly. But does that mean you can't learn it? Oh, of course you can learn it. A big part of becoming more emotionally mature is recognizing when you're acting immaturely. That happened to me with somebody at one of my professions. I came back, God got a hold of me and said, you got to go back and make that right. I said, sweetheart, I was emotionally immature. I want to take full responsibility about that. I said what I did. I took full responsibility for it, and I apologized and moved on. When you engage in an emotionally immature reactivity, you do not have a good sense. You don't feel good. You feel stressed out. You feel rigid. You got to make it right. I did it the next day. Felt good. We grew closer. To grow into emotional maturity, it's important to be honest with yourself when you're being reactive or trying to control others. You take notes from emotionally mature people. A sign of emotional maturity is observing how others handle conflict. You notice how they're smooth and how very effective they are. And you go, oh, I need to take note of that. Whether it's another family member, friend, coworker, or someone you're involved with, you actually learn how to navigate tough situations together and then implement tools in your own life. I call it strategies, skills, and tools. You don't feel perfect, but you feel more solid. It's like, wow, I made that right. I made that right. Yeah. Everyone wavers in their emotional maturity from time to time. But if you get sick or tired or stressed, our levels of emotional maturity, they tend to go down. It's called the human experience. Yes, it is. We miss it. But a consistent sign of being emotionally mature is having a stronger sense of self. Yeah. When I did that earlier this week, I was like, wow, Janice, that was just the right thing to do. You have moral clarity and don't need people to validate you to make you feel secure. You're not losing yourself, and they're not losing themselves if somebody disagrees with them. That's just a sign of emotional maturity. They just don't feel threatened in the same way that emotional immaturity can cause people to feel. Listen, what have we looked at tonight? We're looking at, this is an America at the Crossroads election year. We looked at emotional maturity. They go hand in hand. Listen, we're going to keep on this journey because we are going from patterns of destruction in our nation, and we're going and pushing towards dignity because we are one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As we go, yes, together, us, we, the people, from destruction to dignity. I will see you next week. We're going to dissect this thing more. We're going somewhere, and it's expecting us when we get there. Good night.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of From Destruction to Dignity with Janice Pons. Janice's mission is to provoke thought, bring awareness, and point people towards intervention when needed. As a reminder, this show is not therapy, but for educational purposes only. For more information, check out JanicePons.com or follow her on social media.
Education, affirmation, dedication, information, revelation. A new nation. We are God empowered. Strength is ours. Liberty. Been set free. Education, affirmation. dedication, information, revelation.